Okay, guys. Welcome to the first space post nuke in this year 2024. Uh, there is a lot of things to say. Most of it, I'd say, positive. Couple of it rather negative. First of all, let's start with the mishap. Apparently, due to brigading from NAFO, following an intervention over a thread regarding the Ilyushin 76 that got shot down with something in it. Surely not missiles, that's one thing. And apparently, surely not with the intended target from the Ukrainian side, which has, from its mouthpiece, Mr. Yusuf, indicated that they were expecting high level Russians to be on that plane, therefore giving away the reason on why was the plane shot down. So yeah, I published a excerpt of the pictures. That excerpt showed a mangled hand with a specific tattoo, and probably that triggered a NAFO shitstorm, which caused the suspension of Pipistrello 333. Now, of course, I had foreseen that, given how it mostly happens. Every contact with our friends at NAFO, which bring discomfort to them, will be followed up with a barrage of reporting. And unfortunately, there isn't enough on most of my timelines to basically ban me for multiple stints on Twitter. But as I said, I will not change. I promised multiple times not to interact with NAFO, but alas, it's too funny and it's too convenient for me, given that they are stupid and they will react always through the same exact manner. Um, too bad, but at least the spaces are recorded. There is a Timor Criminal Radio. You can check it out on YouTube. Thanks to our THD management, we can have that space. Now, when it comes to the thread itself, when it comes to the Ilyushin 76, as I said, there is a high probability that the Ukrainians were played, and there is a high probability that indeed there were people in there that were supposed to be there, but that the Ukrainians thought would come with another plane. Therefore, they hit the head negotiator plane, I think, thinking they would be there. So it would have been a perfect shot, taking out one Ilyushin 76 and taking out a couple of high-standing Russians, including a general who was responsible for the exchange. The fact that the plane was there, the Ukrainians were there, also clearly indicates that these guys have absolutely no responsibility at all. You cannot trust them. The fact that they, try to go all over the place saying that it was them, then it wasn't them, then still it was them, and then Yusuf comes out saying, yeah, these guys were expecting there. Walks back the whole shootout logic, but now we have seen the traces of very specific small side pattern shots, which probably were fired at the plane. At least two missiles. We've seen that being a normal occurrence when it comes to that. The occurrence would be, double tap, triple tap as much as you can. And given that they knew where the plane was coming from, they had multiple times to conceal the Patriot battery and attempt what they did. It worked in the sense that The plane was shot down. However, what was on the plane, in my opinion, wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. So yes, it's a huge loss when it comes to Russia, in the sense that the plane and its crew are extremely important. But no, I don't think that Ukrainians were bargaining for this kind of mishap. And this would also create a precedent, which, as I said, would serve the Russian position when it comes to no more exchanges for a while. Once again, we don't know yet 100%. We are not sure about who was on the plane, how many were there on the plane, and so on, except for the crew. And at least regards, given the couple of pictures I have filtered, at least one guy is a Mariupol prisoner of war, and I probably will see more evidence of these guys being dead. And I'm saying something else, that the main issue with this story is that it's impossible now for Russia to retract out of the 65 people dead. Not that much because Russians cannot lie, quite the contrary, but because the Ukrainians themselves got out and said, okay, we did it because we're hoping to hit something bigger, therefore showing their perfidy and their treachery. I don't think that we need any kind of further proof or evidence of how the Ukrainians are playing this game. They cheated before, and once again, it's to be expected. They are the underdog here, so they will do these kind of things. It's all up to the Russians to avoid this thing happening, but in this sense, I have a small hunch there that they were played when it comes to which plane was targeted and why it was targeted. The Russians confirmed the story from the beginning. Two major negotiators were supposed to be on the plane, the general. Ukrainians also said that they were expecting two guys to fly, but the FSB told these guys not to fly. They were expecting something. Therefore, both narratives coincide there, which means that somehow, somewhere, Russians had a hunch or knew that it was going to come to this kind of mishap. Therefore, they took their precautions by saying, okay, we're not going to risk the big honchos. If the Ukrainians are so stupid, let them kill their own people. And that's exactly what happened. These guys apparently committed a folly, and that's that. There is no discussion here. We're not trying to have a deep discussion, given that there is no certainty. What's certain for sure is that at least one hand with a specific tattoo is from a prisoner of war, and at least one of these guys were there. Now, as for the rest, we are going to start speaking about Avdiivka, about how the Russians, being more or less late, based on what I said previously, about a week or so, managed to grind back a lot of that tardiness, let's say it like this, by exploiting one of the oldest forms of warfare, and that's tunneling. In this case, the tunneling was already present. It appears that, contrary to my dispositions, they didn't exploit a trench of the Ukrainian army. They literally went through the sewers. Therefore, for people who speak Latin, the annotation of this thread is Victoria non olet, which is victory doesn't stink or doesn't smell, because apparently that's what it is. Now, there are 2 points I want to clarify about Avdiivka, the south of Avdiivka. There's a lot of talk about a previous air defense base not have been fallen. That so far is puzzling me, because we got geolocation of the spot, we got Russians taking 3 or 4 presidential guard members in that spot, and it is in the middle of the said Zenit air defense base. None of both sides is trying to take that at face value. I don't know why. I honestly have no idea why. Maybe it is to protect both sides of the narrative at some point. But it seems to me quasi impossible right now, given the advance of the Russians and how the Ukrainians need to defend a huge swath of South Avdiivka positions on heights, because that's a point I want to develop later. I do not see for the love of me how the Ukrainians are going to push through open field north-south to go and resupply or rotate that base. It seems to me like, in fact, both of the sides are not announcing Zenit because it's not tenable to stay there. It's a big resemblance to what Stepove is right now, which is basically a field of ruins, when Ukrainians are not there for at least a month, even more, but they are blocking the Russians from taking over that position, advancing to Berdishi. Why? Because once the Russians take Berdishi, the next step for Ukrainians is Semenivka, which is beyond the small pond/river over there, and it's basically game over for the main supply line within Avdiivka. On the other side, more recently, I think it was posted yesterday, a video from Sparta shows a position in Severne about a kilometer on slant from Severne being taken completely out by FPVs and FPV dropped ammunition. That position, if you see the disposition in the map, is about 300 to 400 meters from the Russian positions on the same tree line. And the Russians have been grinding that position systematically for now about 3 to 4 weeks. And if it's confirmed that it's dropped and the Russians can move through that tree line, occupy that one, it would be a perfect fire point to push towards Severne, which is about 800 meters from that position. Once Severne is taken, and we hope it's not going to become another Stepove, then we have a major problem for the Ukrainians, which is the threshold between both edges of the Russian presence would be around 5 kilometers, even less, which means that the Ukrainians cannot, for the love of God, with everything they have, start risking the same crazy runs they've been doing. There is a huge problem, though, and I hope the Russians are treating it. As I said, there are multiple fortified underground passages between the coke plant up until the north of the city, and they give somewhere outside of the coke plant from its west, not far from Lastochkino. That's a huge problem, because it would allow the Ukrainians to move out of there incognito when the situation is going to be a problem. So the main point would be to, of course, the Russians have the maps of that situation, which they have, because those things were built during the Soviet times. Now, there could probably be other constructions through there by the Ukrainians during the time they were occupying both the plant, like about 2 years from now, but also before that, because as you know, I posted a link with a French Twitter member, which describes the defensive work all over Avdiivka. You can see, if you check the new map, that they have tried to make a new cluster about 1 kilometer from Lastochkino, which means that somehow there is probably also underground work going there from Akaz towards Lastochkino. So there might be a possibility of the of Ukrainians having a evacuation route not that big, because that's exactly what happened with the penetration from the Russian side, from the prom zone to the Tsaska Kotka rear, and then the advancement to the sports street, and so on. So that's in my opinion the biggest problem right now. It is to stop the Ukrainians from getting out of there unscathed. Of course, this is something that the Ukrainians cannot do anymore. They have spent quite some valuable assets in Avdiivka. And of course, I know people are thinking about the lopsided score, and it's pretty logical. As I said, the issue with the war right now, for as long as long-range air defenses, as you can see, can play hide and seek and can have actualized data by a ISR that the Russians cannot touch because there is no status of war between NATO and Russia, will lead to as I said, trying to find any kind of small edge, or then be extremely wasteful with resources, and that's what the Russians did. They had enough to throw to this line in order for it to move 10, 15, 20 kilometers beyond Donetsk and create, as my friend Trapped Aaron said, but I hinted at that as well, a more protected, more survivable highway in order to ferry supplies from northern positions from Lugansk to Donetsk and vice versa. Now, what is the actual reality on the ground? We are going to learn that during the weekend. The biggest reality as it stands right now will be that the South is going to completely change within 2 to 3 days. Ukrainians right now, multiple footage are proving, are not gaining the lost sports street and cluster of dwellings south of Avdiivka back. Actually, at the beginning, we had FB strikes rather deep, not too far from where the Russians popped out the first time. And then we had multiple videos of the Russians being deeper and deeper and deeper up to the latest one that I posted. 2 Ukrainian tanks tried to attack houses at the very edge of the bend that goes towards Avdiivka by the south. And they are hitting a couple of rounds, and then suddenly they are hit back by something, probably an FPV or a artillery round, and they are pulling back as fast as they can. This is rendered worse by the fact that there is this level between where they're trying to pull out going towards Avdiivka and the heights there after Tsaskakotka. The variations between 40 and 20 meters depending from when you attack, but once you are completely out of the dwellings right there, next to the Kimki, what is called the Kimki, or 9th Micro District, call it as you wish, there is this level, that's for sure. And if the Russians manage to fortify that area completely, which is basically putting infantry with 80 assets and bringing people from that tunnel using FPVs to clear up both the lateral side, so towards the industrial zone, and deeper towards the forest between the small valley south north, then you're gonna have a lot more fun in the weeks to come, because then you're gonna have exactly what Ukrainians didn't want since the beginning, which is a urban battle. Why they didn't want a urban battle? Because in the urban battle, both sides will have the same problem. It means you will have to put as much troops as you can in order to stop the other guys from infiltrating you. It's going to be a whack-a-mole, so the Ukrainians will have to either bomb the building themselves, but if the Russians manage to get further down in the city, then you're going to have UMPKs raining on specific buildings, and the Russians having eyes on Ukrainian movements and being able to both stymie them from building to building, but also deduct how the movements are done. Biggest problem, once again, biggest concern is underground movement. Ukrainians have had enough time to find ways to go through them. And as I said, if the Russians could find this evacuation system, the Ukrainians will as well. So it will be a bit of a Rattenkrieg, so a war of rats. And hopefully we get exactly what we wanted, which is by the very end of this month or very early next month, they are at the Archangel Church, Archangel Michael Church, and to the Metallurg Street. Once it's there, the Ukrainians will have no other choice but to go entirely through the 9th Micro District, which means a reduction of their backfield. You remember what I told you? The biggest problem when you are in any kind of conflict and you are trying to use your backfield or space to maneuver on the back, up, or on the front, is that the moment it starts to shrink and your enemies a backfield or maneuver space starts to grow, you become a lot more predictable, but most importantly, you are a lot more in a shorter backfield, which means that every strike that the enemy is going to manage to hit is going to be a lot more dangerous for you. And therefore, if the Ukrainians are smart this time, they see where this is going and try to fucking get out in the current of February. If not, then it will be again a slugfest at least until the end of April. It is what it is. I have never lied to you guys. I hope that the Metalurg Street would have been reached by now. It's not too far, but it's still too far. However, on the church story, on the Archangel Michael Church or Basilica, call it as you wish, they are a lot closer, about 650 meters from the line of contact. They were already there about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is extremely important on the Russian side because it gives them also a point of coordination. This is very important in any kind of urban battle. You have to coordinate, of course, via non-objective assets. Non-objective assets are, in this case, drones, which are not what you see because you are looking at a line of sight field, unless, of course, you go up in height, which would be if you get any kind of skyscraper or multi-story block. Unfortunately, those multi-story right now are under Ukrainian control at the 9th district, which means it is extremely complicated for the Russians to find their way directly without using drones. However, as I said, once you are inside of a big cardinal point within a city, you can start orienting yourself a lot better. Of course, in this case, those guys have been there for a while, so they're not going to get lost that easily. I'm just saying that within city navigation and not showing yourself would be a lot easier. If you want to have a pointer, think at Gaza. A lot of Palestinians, of course, know the neighborhoods very well, but they have also their own points of references based on what exists. And one of the reasons why the Israelis are doing this, first of all, is to have more clarity, more alleyways in Gaza, but also to deprive the Palestinians easy navigational overground, above ground pointers. Now, when it comes to Avdiivka, why is it fucking up to the north? Recently, there was a call from Sofa Division, said that there was a counterattack around kilometer 440 on the Ukrainian side that had almost reached the railway. We don't have any kind of confirmation of that attack visually, and you can check it both at Cope State, LA, Crimea Caprice, Teti mapping. Everybody who's doing maps right now, even Ukrainians, are not declaring any kind of offensive there. I don't know where it happened, how it happened, and then I think yesterday we had a counter-offensive from the Russian side, pushing towards Stepove and advancing within Stepove up to the edge of the village. Once again, Stepove right now makes no sense. Russians could completely capture it right now. They do not have positions to be able to dug in because they are completely exposed. The village is completely raised. Of course, you can always go to the cellars and dig yourself somewhere there, but it's just going to be easier to bury you there with an FPV or even guided artillery or tanks or whatever. Now, Stepove had, however, a positive point. It pulled out a lot of assets from the 47th. Yes, I know, it also cost a lot of dead Russians and Russian vehicular losses, but the 47th, right now in Avdiivka, in about 3 to 4 months, soon enough, has been completely gutted. They have been pushing the machines. By my count, they are supposed to be 14 down on a defensive role. It is not enough, in my opinion, but still, it's a good thing because, as I said, in an offensive role, those were completely exposed, so you could hit them. On a defensive role, given that they have the cover of the coke plant, 14 is good enough. Why is it good enough? Because most of them are still on the battlefield. One was recovered by the Russians, one was blown by multiple FPVs from the Russian side. About 8 are on the map, still located on top of the 2 else are taken out. There is one in Ocheretine in the highway that was pulled, So that might be maybe fixed. One we saw with the guy that supposedly defeated the T-90M, where the turret is fucked, as you saw on the follow footage. There is another one hit north of Berdishi by Lancet, starting to burn. And there are two others that we saw more recently hit by Sudopizda with FPVs. So there I see 14. It's possible that we're up to 17, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to start, speculating. I only see what's located on the map, and for the map right now, we have 14 damaged, destroyed, stuck, whatever you want to call it. Given that they've had already lost over 50, but even more, because that's the thing that we saw, is that the Ukrainians, for some reason, had a whole boneyard with 15 plus Bradleys destroyed. More or less, they are over the third of the delivered Bradley lost. I am going to between 75 and 80, plus whatever is damaged, cannibalized, and so on. Let's say that half of what was delivered is out or currently unavailable, because that's very important when you are looking into a mechanized warfare point of view. That's one of the discussion I had a couple of days before, when had the discussion why Leopard 2A6 or Leopard 2A4 SRV 122A is super reliable, while in fact actually it's stuck for a huge part in Latvia, being repaired and still not being repaired because of lack of parts. The retard I was arguing with was saying that, oh, that's only a problem of logistics, but that's just not the case. As I said, Ukraine had been delivered 100 pieces of Leopard 2 of all makes to A4, to A5, SRV 122A, and to A6. So this means that they had more or less 3 mechanized battalions worth of Leopard tanks. Of course, these Leopard tanks were distributed by 2 companies in the new Fang Brigade. This reduced their firepower from the beginning, and I explained you why, because the problem is that those were probably going to be used initially, so for the counter, on a typical NATO layout. So basically 4 per platoon, sometimes 5 depending on who you listen, while the Ukrainians mostly were used to a 3 tank platoon system. To 31 or 33 depending who you're using. And then you had reinforced mechanized, that's 41, and then you got super extra tank regiment or tank armies battalions, where you were up to 54 or 56 tanks depending which vehicle model you had, but mostly was 48 with a 4 tank crew type 62 type T62, T55, 54, and so on. So the problem is that we are seeing something very important. There is a huge problem for at least the Leopard, the European side of the equation, to refurbish, repair, maintain these tanks. Why? And this is the thing the Americans discovered that when they had their Thunder War in 1990 against, 1991 actually, against Iraq and Kuwait. They were extremely lucky that the ground campaign lasted only, as they say, 100 hours, for about 5 days. Because one of the biggest issues was that the Abrams tanks were stopping the whole movement, given that they were using a lot of fuel. And because they weren't using the fuel just to move on, they had to idle, position themselves, maneuver, fire. The fuel efficiency dropped from the alleged 280 kilometers of endurance to roughly about 150. This means that what was a, how can I say, just a logic, a SOP logic of 6-hour refueling Abrams, most of the time, because of all this, would drop down to 3, even 4 hours per fire point of refuel and re-equipment of these fighting units, while other units like the Bradleys themselves were still good to go for 100, 200, 300 kilometers. This, as I said, delayed completely because the Americans were using a armored fist, and this is exactly what's happening with Ukrainians right now in a different way, because the vehicles that were touted as 10 times less prone to maintenance and failures than Soviet-made ones are having the exact same problems. After 6 months of activity or inactivity, call it as you wish, according to a German MP, only about 28 tanks that the Ukrainians have of the Leopard 2 model are still used out of the 100 and something that were given to them. This is 30% of the park. Part of the park is destroyed, lost, abandoned, call it as you wish, but it still should be at about 70. So 40 something tanks are in waiting of a repair, are undergoing repair, or are simply locked somewhere in Lithuania for the 285, 286 because the parts are not forthcoming. This is hitting a lot more the Ukrainians than actually what the Russians are destroying. And this is what I wanted to tell to everybody. Like last time we had this discussion about Western military industrial complex. Yes, your tanks would be probably a lot better than Soviet tanks if you have the motor pool, the MTO, to go with them. And also if you have the capability to do that on the field without being disturbed by pesky bananas flying up your ass. This is the biggest situation that we have right now. And we spoke with it, Snake said it as much. Having to go back and forth multiple kilometers from the point of impact, point of failure, point of avarice, being tracked up to the point of repair, or at least the triage point, plus just dispatching this from Ukraine, within Ukraine, to a area outside of Ukraine, it's your time. But it's also the fact that your equipment is not available. And this is the funny part. It may not be destroyed, but you don't have it. This is what happened to the Russians on a couple of episodes already. On Kharkov, there was this story that a lot of people didn't have AT assets or couldn't use AT assets. Was the manpower problem? Was the fact that a lot of the reinforcements that were supposed to arrive earlier to stop the Kupiansk push came later, actually got caught going in while Ukrainians were already bypassing the position. So literally the Russians, instead of like fighting it through, unfortunately abandoned a lot of equipment. But with the Ukrainians, we have the complete different aspect, is that instead of having something like pulling back and going to what they said, they basically have a infantry-based defense offense, call it as you wish. They are still employing these tanks because for them it's still a force multiplier. They need these Bradleys to move on. But by losing them bit by bit, first of all, and I know people are going to say, yeah, it's cope because the T90M was disabled, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, for sure. We also saw Leopard 2A6 get hit by T80 BVMs waiting for them in ambush with 80 GMs. The video is out there. It means nothing. Once again, an ambush is an ambush. The crew has its faults, and it doesn't change that for that T90M, we know at least 3 or 4 Leopards on the air, T90M, 3 or 4 Bradleys on the air that were hit, damaged, or destroyed. So what? Is this the end of it? Is it like, oh my god, 4 Bradleys for one T90M? No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the problems the Ukrainians have less, and the equipment that's used to be a force multiplier is also being spent a lot more than what they can afford. If Ukrainians were building Bradleys on the rear, no problem, would be fine. Like they could be a really huge problem for the Russians. But first of all, there is nothing prepared for them. And I'm not saying that the Americans are not going to go all in and drop 200, 300, 400 Bradleys. Not at all. I'm saying right now they don't have them. And what they have is, for a huge part, in awaiting a repair, not available. Point. Now, the biggest However, problem, and this is something that I spoke about, is that the Russians try and get to a position where they know that the game is over, but because of the losses they incurred so far, they would be there awaiting for the Ukrainians to learn that it's fucked. And I think the movement in the south right now, and if they move on to Severne, it's going to be fine. It's going to cut a huge problem for the Russians because they would need to bother with a whole northern push from the south, so from Vodjana and Severne. That, of course, is a problem because you need to push there. It's going to be costly. They're going to lose a couple more tanks and vehicles, but the Ukrainians need to feel the heat down there. It's exactly what they did. Kamyanka wasn't a great push, and it didn't bag them a lot of territory. But of course, the Ukrainians to have to push on every single front, east and south, which created the opportunity for the special operation in this case, but mostly for the whole push through this eastern and southern area. Once again, this is what I think. It's not what's going to happen, but so far, for a reason or another, we are getting exactly where I thought we would be, give or take a couple of weeks, one or two big maximum. However, once again, the point is to defend those gains right now, not by sitting on the fence and waiting the Ukrainians to come back, but by exploiting two things. First of all, to get to Tsarskoye, the tunnel hasn't been destroyed. And second part, the Ukrainians do not seem to take back that area in order to seal that gap. Most importantly, the Ukrainians seem to also say they do not have the manpower to man the whole line there, which, if it's 100% true, would mean that they cannot also cover the whole southern part of the city once the Russians are going to pour in. And once again, as I said, the biggest issue with city battles so far, right now, has been that the Ukrainians have lost them in great majority. One big difference has been, of course, the battles around Voznesensk and the unfortunate battle up north with Sumy and then Torskoy. But once again, those were not exactly urban battles. The Russians were already moving out of there in March. And of course, the maneuver to try and strangle Kiev. But there, of course, we had very few urban battles. They didn't always turn positive for the Ukrainians. Unfortunately, just too many people. Russians couldn't just not hook up and strangle Kiev. Forces were not enough. However, as I said, every time we've had actual face-to-face line city battles, Ukrainians have always came up second best. Latest such confrontation was, of course, Bakhmut, Artyomovsk now. And it is also happening that the main problem the Ukrainians are having, main doubts that they're having right now, is where to sit next. And this I already proposed 3 lines. One, it's evident, it's online. You can go to Clément Molin on Twitter to see the excavation and trenches made there. There's a line at Semenivka. This, I think, is going to be the most difficult line for the Russians to get. Not that much because it's deep, but because they have a body of water just in front of it and a channel if they're going to go through. The only possibility for me is that if the Ukrainians have a shallow defense line in Semenivka, it's going to be UNPK time. So basically, that line would not even be fought over in general. Now, the second problem would be continuation through Ocheretine by the railway, going there, more clusters of defense than ever. There's a huge cluster up north. I already posted of course now it doesn't exist anymore because Pipistrello account is gone, but basically north, east of Ocheretine, biggest cluster of defenses towards Kalinove. That one needs to be avoided at all cost or bombed to hell. And then south of it, at the Sokol cluster, this one is smaller, but it's also more problematic because the Russians are pushing towards Berdishi, and that could be flanked actually given the fact that it is at the same level of height from Berdishi. Therefore, it would require from the Ukrainians to make sure they don't get stuck anywhere when it comes to that type of combat situation. Now we're gonna have something else, something different, more important right now. The biggest threat for Ukrainians right now is not military. It's not even the political situation, both in Europe or United States. Biggest threat they have, immediate threat they have, is that they don't have the money. Ukraine right now, within 2 to 4 months, would need to overhaul its manpower. Whatever they're doing right now, whatever is trained in Europe, whatever is trained in the US, in Germany, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not enough. I haven't seen any kind of indication, given the pictures that we see from Ukraine itself. The latest pictures, one of them was a small snapshot from Azov. They are back to T-72 M1s without thermal sights. And there is an old Saviem, I think, emergency truck that has been turned into a technical with a Zeus 23-2. There is another Australian Ute M113A4 that has also been turned probably into an air defense truck, probably either with a Serbian Zastava 20mm or a Zu-23-2. So we are going, at least at the first sight, into a barrel scrapping mode from the Ukrainian part. We had also the announcement by Germany of its 2024 aid package, and what I see there is that whatever is going to be given this year to Ukrainians is about 600 vehicle stops. If the Leopards and the BMP/Marders are not included in the 450 vehicles. Those 600 given by them, the 80 Leopards, you need to know that right now the Ukrainians, whatever they have as Leopard 1s, only one has been pressed into combat. It was lost immediately. And it wasn't even lost to a direct hit. And if it was so forthcoming, so great, then Azov would be parading with Leopards because those have thermal sights. Instead of that, these Leopards, except the one that was lost to a shelling, have been shown so far in training, and more training, with training ammunition. So there is this opinion of mine that whatever is going on with the Leopards, either Ukrainians are too afraid to use them because of potential catastrophic losses. And I'm not speaking about the tanks themselves. We don't care about material on both sides. We are speaking about the crew. There are 4 members in a Leopard crew. There is fluid everywhere in a Leopard tank. There is ammunition everywhere in the hull and in the turret. So trust me, you do not want that to blow up, even though the ammunition and explosive mass on that tank is slightly lower per unit as on a T62 or a T54-55. The biggest problem, I think, for Ukrainians right now is to calibrate properly what they want to do with these antiques. Russians so far have almost never pressed them on the front line. Ukrainians tried once, it turned how it turned. They have tried to be nearby the front lines with M55s, which are deeply upgraded T55s from Slovenia. But you know, I twerked. 4 of them were taken out without even firing a shot. I surmise 5 because there is one incident with a stovepiped round in training, but let's say 4. We don't care. So, whatever Germany is going to give this year, qualitatively, is wrong, and it's worse than that they gave last year for the counter. I'm expecting, and I already made a tweet about that, about mostly post-Soviet equipment that they still have in storage, or they're going to buy from someone. My main point would be they are going to try and convince Cyprus to let go of some of their BMP3s, which is going to be extremely complicated because there's nothing on the market on short term for the Cypriots, the Greek Cypriots in this case, the official recognized um, authority on the island, to replace them with anything close to relevant. There could be some buybacks from Armenia. Armenia is starting to go against Russia. They introduced regulation for their uniforms to be NATO style. Of course, I said that as much. It doesn't matter because almost everybody now, even the Russians, are employing NATO standard uniforms, including to the pattern with multicam. But anyway, so that's going to be a problem. But most importantly, the 450 armored vehicles that I was speaking about, if the Leopard 1 and BMPs are not included on 450, are going to be what? MRAPs, so probably more dingoes. We know that those things are not good enough for direct line combat. Probably M113s, which are needed. They are needed because there is nothing else that you can do. If you are following Andre BT on Twitter, you will know that he's showing some absolutely end of the barrel kind of shit. T-72 tankers hitting their bottom tanks with an actual fire to be sure that the tank is warm in order to start it, because it's diesel, of course. BMP-1s back kicking for a starter, so basically towing it on the back in order to make the generator rave. We've seen fucking shitty cages that lock a lot of the visibility and also usability of the turret from the crew. Basically, once again, Ukrainians are really going for that bottom barrel. So whatever the Germans are going to give, which is also the biggest European contribution for 2024, which is supposed to be 8 billion, by the way, it's going to be worse than this. The only hope that Ukrainians have right now is that somehow the Americans become full tilt crazy and start really shipping what they promised. So basically, on top of the 100 something Abrams that were allegedly promised, they dropped 200 more. On top of the less than 200 Bradleys that are there, they dropped 300 more. So they started creating proper ABCTs, so basically armored brigade combat teams with the Ukrainians. And then by having this familiar ecosystem, cooperating ecosystem, maybe something can be happening. But the problem, once again, is that Ukrainians do not have very, 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 very precious demining kits, obstacle overcoming kits, local communication kits. This is the one of the thing is very important. Everybody is speaking that Ukrainians are super tech savvy and all that stuff, but when you see the forces on the field on both sides, they all have the same kind of short range, shitty civilian grade or police grade radios. Communication on a basic line, so on the front line, on the trenches, is the same for both sides. Therefore, it's completely open. We will not speak about EV on both sides because it's permeable on both sides. We will speak about Russian stupidity in some cases. We will speak about utter stupidity on Ukrainian cases. So basically, the tunnel attack from the Russians apparently happened because somehow Ukrainian defenders that were bypassed by the tunnel lost complete communication with the rear, which meant that the Russians could take out the first guys in the first trench and within 5 to 10 minutes be already on the follow-up trench, clear that up, and they were able to push over 1.5 kilometers without being even noticed. This I find extremely difficult to believe, but it could be happening, it could be true. But it also shows that if the Russians are able to do this when they prepare, this type of mission-based, task-based actions are also something they can do. And this makes it all the most complicated for Ukrainians to now try to assert that tactical communication C2, C4 that supposedly was held by the use of Starlink, use of protected channels by the American sugar daddy, let's say it like this, for battalion level, brigade level communication, and so on and so forth. So on that aspect, my biggest problem I have now for Ukraine is that the help that is going to come this year, despite everything I was said, unless the Americans change their tune, is not going to be better than what they had last year. And that makes sense, actually. Because when you see what they got last year, even if you count the losses, they still should have some remaining. Even in the case of Leopards, they should still have repaired within the year those 40 that for the moment are not available. The problem with that idea is that you are going to fight undermanned for the course of multiple weeks, even multiple months. Fighting undermanned means that your enemy, who doesn't give a shit about you not having the assets that you are supposed to have, is going to push on you. That's what happened swiftly and shortly in around end of December, and that's what happened also now swiftly and shortly end of January, and the grind's going to go like this. No, the other bigger problem for Ukraine is that for that rotation, that growth in manpower and so on, they need the money. And that money so far is not forthcoming for multiple reasons, but the biggest reason right now is not that the Americans don't have the authorization to do it or the Europeans are being blocked by Hungary. No, the problem with that is that even if this money is available right now, there is nowhere to spend it. And one very specific case, when I can explain you how, is exactly what NATO announced right now. They said we have contracted for $1.2 billion of about 2020, 230,000 rounds for 2025. There you go. If you got this money to spend, why the fuck are you delivering in 2025? Once again, right now the capacity is full. A lot of things are not going the way the Western military-industrial complex wanted. In some ways, it's going better than assumed because, as you can make the calculus, they slapped a $5,400 something price tag on basically dumb shells, which covers for inflation, but covers also for the investment they're going to do, while having also the times, but not even that they don't even need to blow their productivity. It's very simple. What's happening right now? What's happening is very simple. They're going to deliver 200 something in 2024. Another 200 something is going to come from probably all over the world, part of Europe, part of stocks bought in India, part of stocks bought in Pakistan, some stuff coming from South Korea, plus what the Americans are going to dump, probably between 480 and 600,000. So we're going to get to that baseline 1.4 million rounds all year long, which is exactly what we spoke about in 2022 and 2023. There's just not a way for the Americans right now to do what they want to do while also resupplying themselves. That's as simple as that. You cannot underproduce what you already send there, at least on paper in this case, and think that that's going to help you refill your stocks. What you're going to do is you can maybe put new rounds on your stocks, but you will have to work on a FIFO, actual philo basis. So first in, last out. You're gonna drop the first production to refill your shells, and the last shit that you kept because it was the older equipment, actually newer in your arsenal, but it's the older compared to what is produced right now, you're going to send to the Ukrainians. This is not also what's happening. A lot of rounds that we're seeing are produced in 2022, 2022, 2023, which means that there is no refillment, or at least it's very slow. This could also explain, as I said, on top of the fact that we know what orders were placed, at least publicly, is that they are still doing the refilling, which is reducing the capability of Ukrainians to have the ammunition. On the other side, we have another big issue, and that is, where are the barrels? We've seen some funny things. Gavin pointed it out by posting a unicorn on the Ukrainian side, a D-30 with a very weird camouflage being deployed in Kherson, getting taken out. That type of gun for Ukrainians was basically haram, because the type of deployment that you need and so on and so on, it needs to be on a fixed position with a TriStar solution, takes time. It's a bit too heavy for a pull-up by a Humvee, and it's good enough for a smaller truck like a Unimog and stuff like that. The problem is, once you go to the Unimog, you're giving out your position because the truck is big. And I also posted, if you remember, they were feeding up a SPG position with an HX8 man truck, which was filled rather fully with ammunition. It was visible by the Zala. So all these things, as I said, is that the Ukrainians, it's not that they don't have the capability to fire more, in my opinion, in ammunition. I think the biggest trouble for them is that they have a lack of barrels right now, and those barrels at any point are not forthcoming. And it's true that they maybe have been saving the best, because finally there are not that many Caesars that have been taken out, no Archer, although we have spotted an Archer under 20 kilometers from the lock. One Panzer Haubitze 2000 was once attacked. Italians say that there were two with rather small damage, and they were forced to put a spike armor on top of it. So what is being lost are rather legacy pieces, if you exclude the crab, of course. Mostly M109s, mostly Gwodzikas, mostly Acacias, and we're seeing that those vehicles are actually donation as well. So on this aspect, the biggest problem I have is that, therefore, even if you want to keep these guys to be able to fire more rounds, you're going to reduce your expenditure. But also, that means that if you want to reduce your expenditure, you need also to play, as I said, with the fact that at some point your life span of your barrel is going to go southways, and you're going to have to pull it and to put something else at the spot. So far, we are not seeing that. The French said I wanted to send 78 guns this year, but the reality is that they only have budgeted for 12. And the 60 others are depending to the new European initiative to find about 5 billion in order to spend into new equipment for Ukraine. This can happen tomorrow, can happen in 2 months, and so on. But the longer it is delayed, as the French have said, the longer it's going to take for the industry to produce these new weapons. Because right now, a lot of people, and I'm going to take the latest case of Romania, Romania is probably going to give away a lot of its artillery because they concluded a deal in July this year for 50 up to 59 K9 155 self-propelled howitzers. The problem is that they're not going to get the 18 that they want to buy right now until 2025. So that capability would need to be covered by something. And of course, giving away M1977s or M1981s from Romania is not a big issue. At the end of the day, those 152 millimeters. But the doctrine and the logic of a Ministry of Defense is not like that. They cannot say, oh, you know what, we're going to still give you, even if we don't have replacement for those, we're going to still give you the 152 millimeters because at the end of the day, they're not the same pieces, so it's better to have nothing than to have something. It's not how it works. So, on one sense, I have a problem, which is that it appears more and more obvious that whatever the plan is on NATO side for Ukraine, it entails Ukraine to get fucking shanked in 2024. Maybe something is going to happen in 2025 where European production, American production is going to go to a point where Ukraine is going to be confident enough to do more than just bleed and make the Russians bleed. However, we don't know how 2024 is going to go for the main reason that it seems to me that breakthroughs are possible in select areas from the Russian side. And if you follow up what happened in 2022 with the Lugansk campaign, if the Russians keep going like this with a steady supply, small incremental modernizations, if the koalas get there, if the whole range of Lancets is available, because unfortunately, it also needs to be said, right now there are 200 to 300 Lancet maximum fired by month. When you see that Hezbollah, for the reason that is going on Gaza and also at the border with Lebanon, literally got handled a Almaz apparently 3 with the new Seeker, and Russians after 2 years they are nowhere with their Autonomia similar missile. I'm sorry, but at some point we will need to have that discussion that Russians are also going for the grind, cheap grind with lives of their own soldiers. I always said this, it's an attrition war. They were always going to go there because with regards to Ukraine, that's their soft spot. But what I meant with this is that if these breakups happen in a timely fashion, and as I said, you start having cracks all over the line on specific areas of the spot, and you end up with the Russians in April, inshallah, being at the Oskol up north, having this 20-25 kilometer buffer from Donetsk, and then taking over up until the gates of Ugledar by north, well, it's almost game over for the Ukrainians. And I'm not saying that the war is done, but the political underpinnings of the war would be done. This is where everybody's mistaken when it comes to what the Ukrainians are ready to do. Ukrainians were super happy, super nice in 2022 because they got back huge swaths of Kharkov, almost whole of Kharkov Oblast, and about 22% of Kherson Oblast, which were, I'll explain this, basically a given for Kherson once the Nikolaev takeover was fucked. And okay for Kharkov is because the Russians, at the end of the day, they didn't really need it to attack Donbass in the way they did from Bakhmut. Now, the problem is that, as I said, if the Russians are at your skull, you have a huge problem because now you need to do what you did when the Russians were not strong enough on that line. You literally run after them when they got the fuck out for Balakleya, Izium, Kupiansk. But now if they put you back at the Oskol line and you need to do another operation when you need to attrite them in order to advance, but as we saw, if the Russians start doing something properly when it comes to defense, they're almost undefeatable, not almost, I'm going to say it, with the current layout from the Ukrainian forces, there is no chance if the Russians install themselves at the Kupiansk area, start popping up the same structural defense assets that they did for Zaporozhye. It's done, it's over. Kupiansk causeway, the Oskil, becomes the de facto border. Where it's going to go down south, I don't know. But your Oskil line is going to be your border. And it's literally, in my opinion, is going to be the minimum frozen line for whatever next deal is going to happen. Same thing, if you are advancing and you're going to join Ugledar by north, have that line, then you have a shorter backfield for Ukraine in Zaporozhye. That means Ukraine is fucked in Zaporozhye. They will need to give up a vertical buffer at least 10 kilometers in order for them not to get completely bombed by the side. Nature abhors non-natural borders. Natural borders are always easier to defend. Sometimes it doesn't happen. We can see that with Azerbaijan and Armenia, because one side has not the assets to be using those natural borders properly. We can also speak about the Russians that hadn't fortified the Oskol properly as well, or the Ukrainians that got completely pushed aside early in 2022 from the Dnieper line, etc., 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 etc. However, once again, the biggest problem for Ukrainians right now is that they need between 10, 12 billion dollars to start the principle of mobilization that would need to survive 2024. Once again, assets are not the problem. Vehicles are not the problem. They're gonna lose 3,500, 4,000 a year. It doesn't matter. They can creep like this another or 2 other years without much influx from outside. What is going to matter is that their manpower goes down and their manpower is not replaced. What the Russians need to make sure of is, unfortunately, kills, is damage, is irrecoverables. And this can work in multiple ways. What is happening in a lot of areas in Donbass right now is that the Russians are going against rotations, are going against evacuations. Ukrainians have done the same early on. But in this case, the greatest advantage that the Russians have is that there are more. So more FPV teams and so on. Now, the biggest problem that we are feeling right here is what is at the end for Russia. Because, I made these huge, wonderful drawings on a map, and I thought it was like political, and I still think that's what the Russians want, which is a huge chunk, even the whole of Donbass, some buffer areas, both north, east, and south, and then to choke as much as possible the sea trade when it comes to Ukraine. This would be, I think, the end game negotiation goal for Russia. The issue, though, for everything that we're seeing is what happens when it stops. And right now, Ukraine can still turn around, even if it's in a very bad state post-war, because they're going to have to actually make a proper accounting. And as I said, what you account for today or what you accounted for 2022 is not what's going to happen in 2026 or 2027. So what costs today 400 billion, 500 billion in reconstruction might cost 700 in a couple of years. On top of it, if the war doesn't stop immediately for Ukraine, the losses that they're going to account for, the deep losses, because this is the most important part. A lot of people that were killed the first and the second year, as everybody said, were ideologicals. So were people who wanted to go and get killed. They were, in a sense, that thriving, propelling force of the Ukrainian revolution of dignity. They are the martyrs. A lot of people that are getting killed the last months, they're cattle. There are people who are joining because there is this kind of duty, but they weren't the first guys. There are people getting backed, cornered into some supermarket, into a gym, or whatever. There are people who can also not pay for the privilege not to be called up, although the Ukrainian Secret Service is cracking down on these guys. Now, our biggest problem, once again, is that you need money for all this, and Ukrainians do not have that money. I would like to be 100% sure and tell you that They're going to get it, and I think they are going to get it. They are going to get it 100%. They're going to get that money. Believe me. Be that from assets confiscated from the US, be that from special vehicles found out by the US, be that from a special drawdown by the EU. They're going to get that money because the investment into Ukraine is basically a sunk cost fallacy right now. Ukraine is not important per se. If they survive, or they don't survive, the bigger goal for the US at least is that Russia goes down a notch and it's completely out of the European market as a supplier, so they cannot make the money that they used to make, which was a net loss for the US. If the Europeans were spending about $500 billion in energy revenues to Russia, that $500 billion goes to the US, or at least in different schemes is going to benefit mostly to the US right now with the LNG, or to US allies in case Qatar and the guys in the Gulf. However, this at the end of the day is going to get head on into the reality that Ukrainians are people. The Ukraine is supposed to be a nation, a state, and trying to push them to get killed or to fight a war that at the end of the day is going to lead to the same reconstruction, win or lose, is going to be putting all these guys into a very awkward situation. As I said, if it's to be the amount is to be believed, 100,000 people do not have a limb, some multiple. Those are going to be a burden on society. And it doesn't matter, you're going to fucking Robocop them or whatever. They still are going to be not complete, let me tell it like this. So, I know that often we joke about Ukraine dominating Paris 24 Paralympics, and it's a very bad joke, by the way. But it's also going to be a truth. You're going to have a society that's mangled, physically, spiritually, but also on its general tissue. For a lot of us in the Balkans, we know what it is. Okay, a little bit less for us in Albania because we caused that shit show and we were mostly the ones that suffered from it. But the ex-EU wars, literally, they have dozens of thousands of people to die over the course of 3 years. And then you had the Kosovo War, of course, and Macedonian troubles and so on. But these things produce societies that are deeply, deeply dysfunctional at the end, especially with destruction if nobody comes to fill you up. And if you are going for the Russian funds now to sustain the war, that means that it will be almost nothing left when the war is going to be done if you don't win. Because if you don't win, you cannot impose Russia reparations. If you lose your war, there are no you can fucking forget about reparations. You are going to risk to pay Russia back in order for Russia to leave Ukrainians breathe. And once again, as Balkanics, we exactly know what it is. We had the Ottomans come through and literally didn't matter who the fuck killed them. If it were the Serbs, if it were us in the 15th century, if there were fucking Romanians or Valachians, whatever, didn't matter. They were just fucking coming until they stopped because something changed. But for Ukraine and Russia right now, I do not see that historical turnaround, even if Putin goes. Because Putin goes, war is lost, this guy's going to get hit with $1 trillion worth of reparations. Ain't nobody going to sign that in Russia. Not until they have nukes. And if they win, that means that everybody who's living in Europe and in the US, we're going to pay money to rebuild that place. Which means that mentally, that nation not only going to be scarred, but it's going to be done. Let's say that they lose this war, they're going to lose like 20-25% of their general territory. What's going to happen? Huge depopulation via what? Migration. And we can joke always that, Ukrainian immigrants are not, always good or bad, whatever. But nobody's going to think twice between a Ukrainian and a European. And once again, I'm telling you, when it comes to proper integration, those guys are going to have a huge advantage, as they had at the early stages of the war, where you had literally guys on CNN saying, "Oh, but the difference between them and Syrians, they are white, they have blue eyes, Christian." This is the gist of the truth, and especially if now they know they can get the fuck out and install themselves in Europe, they're going to be a completely different vision from the logic that they had early when they thought, okay, the war is not going to last, or it's going to last, I'm not going to move here, and they were greeted and welcomed. So the problem right now for Ukraine is that, okay, even though they get the money, but they don't stop the war, is going to happen once the second money, so whatever they're going to steal from Russia or take from Russia, is going to run out, and we're going to have to start repaying another 2, 3, 4 years. When I say we, it's people who are have any kind of interest in the West, be that are Westerners or not. So deep down the logic, Russia, instead of losing, as everybody's saying, has already won. Because we are not discussing anymore about how we're going to punish Russia. What are we going to do with them? Remember the titles in 2022 in November. We need to be true about not being afraid that Russia is going to lose. We need to start thinking about the world with a lost conflict for Russia. We shouldn't be afraid about Russia disintegrating if Putin capitulates. We're a year later. I can start publishing all that bullshit. We're a year later. What everybody's saying is that we should make sure that whatever happens, Ukraine can sustain whatever they still got there, not lose more territory. And once again, this might also be wrong. We don't know. Maybe in 6 months something happens and Russians decide it's not worth it anymore. We should not be blinded by the current thing. But the way it's shaping up, unfortunately, means that whatever victory is going to be on both sides is going to be a Pyrrhical one. And the problem with a Pyrrhic victory for Ukraine means that we're going to discover things that right now we only dread. We might discover 200,000 dead. We might discover 500,000 guys gone, irrecoverables. I don't know. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying from what I'm seeing, there is no way right now Ukraine is playing dead. They are giving everything they have. They are putting everything they have. They still not managed to push back a single Russian gain from October. And also the Russians right now are playing hot and warm. Sometimes they send 10 guys to get fucking FPV'd. The next day they send 10 tanks. You never know. And the rotations are far more often than what they did from September to May 2022 to 2023 in Bakhmut. This is our problem. This is our main issue. This is our main issue, is that the view that we have on the war right now is very, very negative. Leads to Russia exploiting all 2024 to reduce all the key advantages that Ukraine has on the battlefield. I'm not saying the ASR, I'm not saying the foreign help, I'm saying an ability to be able to plan how many troops, how many forces it can spend. If you are following tightly what's going on this January, there are more and more releases of artillery being lost. We discovered that despite whatever Oryx was saying for Krinky, for instance, instead of 17 barrels being lost over two months and a half, over 50 have been hit. And the funny part is that we are seeing them day by day getting taken out, but somehow some people avoid counting everything. And I'm agreeing about 15 of them I wouldn't count, but you got still 35. It's double what I was counting, and this is the problem where I'm having, and it also works for Russia. What's visible right now has gone into a point that we cannot make a proper prediction. The same thing as I said. I made this joke in September, no September, in December 17 last year about Hamas staying. The patience was Hamas staying in a tunnel for 2-3 months, then getting up with a Kalashnikov, killing a Jew, and then we saw the Russians literally going for a month in a sewer, popping out and taking 3 square kilometers. This patience, this is what I always incentivize people to have. But right now, I'm having this issue, and I'm being patient. I'm seeing more or less where they want to go, but I'm not expecting what's happening. I wasn't expecting a possible shutdown on A50. I wasn't expecting the Ukrainians to shut down Illusion 76 with people on board. I wasn't expecting the Ukrainians to completely crumble so fast by such daring rate, and I should have expected that because that's what they did on the prom zone. And I also wasn't expecting the Russians to also play this game again, hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. All this lead me to believe that this war might be decided this year in a sense or another, but mostly it's going to be how much Ukraine wants to sacrifice on the altar of preservation of their state. If unfortunately they cannot sacrifice enough people this year, next year is going to be maybe an imposition of a line of contact, a frozen line, where the US probably is never going to agree to recognize it as Russian, but who is going to be tacitly a North-South Korea scenario, which is going to be extremely, extremely bad for Ukraine, as I said, because if you got this North-South Korea scenario, no reparations from Russia. And even if Russia loses those 200 billions, if the war goes as we're seeing, Ukraine is going to have to be invested at least 8 trillion over 10, 15 years in order to be rebuilt with a modicum of what it used to be with 25% territory less. So basically, whatever the Americans try to do here is going to be short on so many things. Yeah, maybe Ukraine is still existing as a quote-unquote free, independent, and bullshit state, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. NATO cannot defend its allies. I know it's not going to be that. I mean, I personally, I don't believe this shit. But the point is that everybody in NATO put their face on it, and it risks, if nothing changes in 2024, to become a complete shit show. Now, of course, the Americans wouldn't care. As I said, in war, first rule is lose your shame. So, yeah, of course, we quote-unquote lost Ukraine or part of Ukraine. What the fuck cares? Ukraine is still there. Maybe they're not going to be NATO member, but we can always inject it with whatever we want. Weapons, advisors, volunteers, call it as you wish. And of course, there are going to be agreements that Ukraine's army should be like a smallish one. But still, we saw what happened when Ukraine was in a deep recession for almost 5 years. They still managed to have a rather large score of mobilizable men, up to 300,000 for 2022 or 2023. So, as I said, once again, the biggest problem right now is for America to accept something that wouldn't be something worse, but also that Ukraine understands what history is, their own history actually with Russia. For as long as a border is going to be between the two states, you will have to ask consent to the other side of the border. And unfortunately, I mean, I see a couple of people here that would agree with me. For as long as you have a bigger neighbor, you're always gonna have to ask him if you don't bother him with your music or your fucking activities or whatever. So yeah, most of the time, as I said, it's gonna be the last point. We hope that whatever Washington has in mind financially for Ukraine, it would be given as soon as possible, so Ukraine can face the piper or Russia can face the piper. One of the two. It doesn't matter. I'm not saying that it's a done deal, but the more this thing goes on, the less the input is going to be decisive for Ukraine when it comes. So I hope with February, huge tranche of payments like 10, 12, even 20 billion aggregated, Ukraine can start this mobilization, can produce something to at least try and avoid this slow erosion of its positions. And if it doesn't work, then everybody can go home in 2025. If not, then it's just going to be an agonizing death for this war, where we're going to be like Korea in 1953, where the war was literally pointless. Both sides had proven to each other that that's it, this is the fucking line, and finally we got the state in which we are. Of course, it's going to be undecisive and it's going to be a problem for both sides, but in this case, those who are going to suffer the most are going to be the supporters of Ukraine, because it would have been proven that they cannot even sustain a small economy like Italy on the field of battle when it comes to productivity, willpower, and of course, expensive blood. Thank you very much, guys. If you want to ask questions, whatever, I'll give you the voice. But today, it was just to reintroduce the account, and also, as I had promised, to make a small space. Probably on Monday we're gonna have a longer one, a more interesting one. Thank you very much. If you want to intervene, it's up to you guys. Yeah, okay, then very on you, man. Yeah, I think you can speak, man. No problem. Go on.
Oh, hey, how's it going? Congrats on your new account. Must be like, what, your 20th right now?
No, not that much, but not far either.
What do you think of? I'm more into investing right now. I'm just trying to figure out, especially the commodities trajectory and how Russia's involved. I'm always kind of surprised that Russia still pays Ukraine for transit fees for natural gas to Europe, whatever's left. What's the thinking of Russia there? Like, I mean, their contract with them should probably, I think, end this year. Do you think they'll actually extend it and then keep paying them to ship natural gas to Europe?
Uh, I don't think that Russia has the immediate intention of renewing the contract. One of the problems is that the volumes shipped right now have been dropped to, I think, 5% of the market share, which compared to the 40% they had should be around 20 BCM instead of 140. That was the average, stuff like that. So the Turk stream is enough. If the Germans need more gas, they can always go back to the table and restart the second Nord Stream that apparently isn't that damaged. So on that aspect, unless the Europeans need more pipe gas, the Russians have no incentives. The incentive, though, is going to be the following: is investing more in liquefied gas for sure, because the Europeans cannot get enough right now, and the Russians can always play with the prices, making it cheaper than what the Americans are proposing. But also, and this is one thing I've always said, the biggest situation for Europe right now is that the huge replacement player, Norway, is already at its goddamn max. They want to have about 12% more productivity within 2 or 3 years, but the proven reserves are so small. We're speaking about 2 TCM, so basically 2 trillion cubic meters, whereas they are exporting about 140 to 155, which is replacing completely Russia in that sense, uh, in terms of exchange within the EU, but it's not replacing Russia in the volume lost. Because they were already, of course, selling to Europe, but mostly the Northern Europe and some places next to them. This means that Norway, which is the big replacement power, has maybe 10 to 15 years tops if nothing changed. Nothing changes expense and expenditure wise. Why? Because we have seen the graphs lately, which show that Germany, Italy, France, all these countries are under pre-COVID levels, and that reduction is probably, and this is a deduction, nobody's 100% sure, but given all indications, it is probably non-household consumptions going down, which, of course, in general means that Europe is losing that small edge it had with quote unquote cheap Russian gas. It was cheap, not that cheap, but also the industrial hub in Europe and its near abroad, like Germany, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and so on, are feeling also the bite. So basically, what I'm thinking here is that Russia is not very interested in to restarting a transit through Ukraine because first of all it loses money and pays Ukraine money. On the other part is that Turk Stream works good enough in the volumes of gas that they send into Europe. If they can add South Stream to that, it's going to be about 50 BCM, and 50 BCM is for the foreseeable future unless everybody sits down and speaks about what's going on in Ukraine. So basically, a war stops, and there is a comprehensive agreement on this situation. Um, we are not going to see the Russians renew the contract. And first of all, as I said, they don't need you. And the second part of it, if Europe is interested in pulling more gas from Russia by a pipe, Russia is going to insist into restarting Nord Stream 2 instead of Nord Stream 1, which is basically blown to shit. And therefore, Russia on that sees a bargaining chip. On the other side is that because Russia right now hasn't had a problem shipping liquefied gas when the demand has been going up, okay, it doesn't completely replace, quite the contrary. It doesn't compare with the piped gas they were pushing to Europe up to 2021. Is that Russia is still there? It's still at the door. It's like that X that you cannot forget and started to dress up more provocatively once you have broken up with her, and then you have your this fight with your new girl, and she goes there, and because she knows you, said, "What's going on, honey? Do you have a problem? Can I help you?" This is the biggest issue that Europe has with Russia and Ukraine as well. It's next door. The new girlfriend being Norway, well, it's 10 years older or 15 years older, figuratively speaking, when it comes to the gas consumption. So you either do it less, or you start, finding other solutions. And on that aspect, Russia has all the cards right now. But if the consumption goes down, we start. Okay, I think you're based in Canada, so you're across the pond. But if we in Europe, for major reasons, start consuming less, that is going to be something that the Russians also would have to keep under control, because it means that whatever happens with Norway or whatever happens with the alternative suppliers, whatever Russia is going to be able to sell once those suppliers are bingo, is still going to be a lot less, and therefore the prices are also going to go down. I mean, that I don't need to explain that to you, obviously, but the thing is the following: Russia can play that game for 1 or 2 years, but it should be staying there. It should be like, sending those small messages, wishing happy birthday, uh, on those dates to Europe, especially when it comes to German industrial interests, because those guys are literally shitting themselves right now. A lot of people have decided, the big players have decided to jump ship and try to go to the US, but the people who stay here cannot move for many reasons, including union reasons in Germany. They're fucked. So on that aspect, yeah, that's what I think. I think Russians are not going to follow up any kind of pipe contract post 2024 unless there is a demand, a specific demand, and if they want to restart that, first of all, would be because the war is done or is going to be done, or they're going to say, you know what, we don't have to pay Ukraine. You cannot impose us anything. If you want more gas, there is Turk Stream, South Stream, or you have Nord Stream. You don't need to deal with Ukraine anymore. And I think unless things go extremely wrong for Ukraine on the battlefield, that also is going to be very complicated for Russia to impose without counter proposals from Germany.
Yeah, I mean, the consumption from Germany is just completely down because basically they're deindustrializing. So I don't see what Germany really wins from all of this, and just kind of shocked,
Germany,
basically.
Germany in this case is very, what they win is very simple. They get to be the honorable loser, the beautiful loser, because that's what it is. And this, you know, idea on the back of their head is very simple. On one side, they have their industrial base telling them, "What the fuck are you doing? You're basically drowning us." On the other side, they have a political elite who is completely fucked up with their own Green Deal. That Green Deal, for a lot of people who know Germany, literally killed the most promising long-term modernization of the thermal engine park, which is, light, the so-called light diesels. With the Volkswagen scandal in the US with the emission particles and everything, there was a big problem, mostly because, of course, they cheated. Volkswagen cheated, but when the comparison was done, a benzene or a gas engine or diesel engine weren't that much different when it came to pollution. The only difference is that, of course, it made sense for the Germans to go for diesel, first of all, for the consumption. It was more economic, quote unquote, but also they had a huge margin of technical advantage with the industry. Now, suddenly, everybody in Germany is convinced that making harakiri, committing seppuku, is the next best thing. So that's what they did. They accepted this infamous Green Deal, where everybody's understanding the problem that petrol or hydrocarbons might be a problem for producing electricity, but they are not only for producing electricity. Petroleum, for instance, the small ad can be turned into almost everything that you have every day. I mean, your jacket, furniture, utensils, and everything. But producing electricity by wind is not going to magically form a chair or form a car. It can power those things. It can power systems to make them, but your how can I say that your raw materials are still needed, and this is the basic problem here. All these people, for some reason, have been completely bamboozled by the thought that because those resources are finite, we need to completely get out of them. And this is, to me, is extreme thinking. And unfortunately, Germany has had a knack for those things for the last century, and apparently is going through the same soul searching this one. And politically, that's the biggest problem. They are so socially obedient in a certain sense, and this is for a lot of northern countries. I mean, just fucking look at Baerbock. Since when the Greens were literal Nazis when it came to war? The Greens, if you looked at them in the 70s, 80s, 90s, those people would rather commit to harakiri instead of starting to ask everybody to spend money to make weapons to, incite war at the border. But that's the thing. That's the problem with Germany and with Europe in general. A lot of people are understanding this war as a opportunity. For one part, is an opportunity to fix, quote unquote, the Europe security structure. But for a lot of other people, it's the perfect to put Russia under a lot of stress, and therefore, have a solution, a end game solution here. So that's what it is, guys. Guys, just a moment. I'm gonna have to cut it because I have a phone call from a client. I'm really sorry about the rest. I'm gonna probably try and get you back on Monday. Thank you very much.